Victoria Sterling slammed her hand on the table so hard the coffee cups rattled across the entire boardroom floor. $80 million. She said each word like a blade. And not one of you can tell me why it's dead. 23 engineers stared at their shoes. That's when she saw him standing in the doorway, in a worn gray uniform, holding a flashlight, watching the machine like he already knew the answer. A maintenance worker. A nobody. And he had the nerve to look calm. What happened next didn't just save a company worth billions. It destroyed every assumption Victoria Sterling had ever made about who deserves to be in the room. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You don't want to miss what comes next. Caleb Brooks had learned a long time ago that invisible was safer. Not happy, not proud, just safer. When you're a 34-year-old single father working the night maintenance shift at a billion-dollar robotics company, you develop a particular skill that has nothing to do with engineering or mechanics, or the advanced degree collecting dust in a box under your bed back home. The skill is this: you learn how to move through rooms without disturbing the air inside them. You learn how to fix things quietly, how to replace parts without making a sound, how to be completely present in a space and leave absolutely no evidence that you were ever there. Caleb had gotten very good at that. Too good, maybe. He arrived at Asterion Robotics every evening at 9 p.m., punched his badge at the side entrance near the loading dock, changed into his gray uniform in the small locker room that smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee, and began his rounds. He replaced burned-out fluorescent tubes in the hallways. He repaired the broken latch on the supply closet on the 3rd floor that the day crew had been ignoring for 2 weeks. He fixed the slow drain in the executive bathroom that nobody wanted to mention in a work order because it was embarrassing. He swept floors that were already mostly clean. He checked the HVAC sensors. He calibrated the backup power panels in the testing corridor. And then around 3 in the morning, when the building was genuinely quiet, he sat in the break room on the 4th floor, ate a peanut butter sandwich his daughter Sophie had packed for him that morning. She was 8 years old and very serious about the importance of bread to peanut butter ratio. And he read. Sometimes engineering journals. Sometimes history. Sometimes the novel Sophie had placed on top of his lunch bag with a sticky note that said, "Daddy, this one is good, I promise." He always read her notes twice. That was his life. It was small. It was contained. It had hard edges and not much softness, but it was his and it belonged to Sophie, and that was more than enough. He had decided 2 years after his wife Maya died that enough was the goal. Not excellence, not ambition, just enough. Enough money to pay the rent on the 2-bedroom apartment in East Austin where he and Sophie lived. Enough food, enough stability, so that Sophie never had to feel the particular cold that comes from not knowing if things are going to be okay. He had felt that cold himself in the months right after Maya's accident, and he had promised himself his daughter would never feel it. So, he was invisible. And he was fine with that. Until the night the machine died, and his quiet, careful life ended. He heard the robot before he turned the corner into Corridor 7. It wasn't a dramatic sound. It wasn't explosions or alarms or the cinematic screeching of failed metal that movies always used when machines broke down. It was subtler than that. It was a rhythm problem, a micro-hesitation in the actuator cycling that created a sound about 3 decibels below what most people would consciously register, a kind of mechanical stutter that skipped like a record slightly off-center. If you hadn't spent 8 years of your life with your hands physically inside machines of this type, you wouldn't notice it at all. Caleb noticed it immediately. He slowed down. He turned toward the testing lab. Through the long panel of reinforced glass that ran along the corridor wall, he could see the prototype. It was extraordinary, 7 feet tall, articulated for hospital use with arm systems designed to assist surgeons in high-precision procedures. 3 years of development. 200 engineers. $80 million in components and research and failed iterations that had been quietly deleted from the company's public record. It was standing still. Dead still. And surrounding it in various postures of frustration and defeat were 8 people in expensive clothing who were clearly trying very hard not to look as panicked as they felt. Caleb watched. He set down his toolbox quietly. He pressed his face slightly closer to the glass. He wasn't trying to be noticed. He was just listening. Reading the machine the way he used to read machines back when reading machines was his entire world. The coupling, he thought immediately. The primary rotational coupling between the torso drive system and the lower stabilization array. It's not balanced. It's been running in compensatory mode so long that the micro adjustments have created a feedback oscillation that the software can't identify because it's not a software problem. It's a mechanical problem disguised as a software problem. He stood there with his hands in his pockets and watched the engineers inside argue. He could tell by the body language what they were saying, even without hearing the words. The tall man near the control panel was defending the software. The woman with the tablet was insisting the problem was in the sensor array. The two younger men near the base of the robot were clearly being blamed for something, and they were clearly not responsible for it. Nobody was looking at the coupling. Nobody was even looking at the mechanical systems at all. They built it, Caleb thought quietly, but they've never had to feel it fail. He picked up his toolbox and started to walk away. That was the thing about being invisible. You could see everything. You didn't have to do anything about it. He had learned that the hard way. He was 10 feet down the corridor, heading toward the electrical panel he'd planned to service next, when the elevator at the far end of the hallway opened and she walked out. He'd seen Victoria Sterling before from a distance, in the way that maintenance workers see executives, which is to say, you see them the way weather sees mountains. They're there, they're large, they shape the environment around them, and they have nothing to do with you. She was 29 years old, and she walked like a verdict. That was the only way Caleb could describe it later. Like every step was a decision that had already been made, and the only question was how long it would take the rest of the world to catch up. She wore a dark blazer, and her hair was pulled back, and she had the particular expression of someone who had already done the math and didn't like the answer. She was heading for the testing lab. Caleb kept walking. He heard the lab door open behind him. Then he heard her voice, sharp and controlled and not loud, which somehow made it louder. Someone want to explain to me how a machine with 800 engineering hours logged this week is currently doing absolutely nothing. He kept walking. Stop. He stopped. He turned around slowly. She was standing in the lab doorway looking directly at him. Not at the engineers behind her. At him. Utah, she said. You were standing there looking at the prototype. I was passing by. You stopped for almost 4 minutes. He had not realized she'd been watching him from the lab. I heard something, he said carefully. One of the engineers. The tall man from the control panel stepped around her shoulder. His name tag read, Harrison, Dr. James Sr., lead engineer. He looked at Caleb the way that certain people look at certain other people, which is to say, he looked at the uniform first and made his entire assessment in about 1 second. He's maintenance, Harrison said with a particular flatness that was more effective than contempt because it contained no emotion at all. He fixes broken light bulbs. I know what he does, Victoria said. She didn't look at Harrison. She kept looking at Caleb. What did you hear? Ma'am, Harrison started. I didn't ask you, James. Harrison's jaw tightened. Caleb looked at Victoria. He measured the question. He measured the room. He thought about Sophie's surgery, which was going to cost $47,000, and which the insurance company had classified as elective in a letter so coldly bureaucratic that Caleb had actually sat down on the kitchen floor after reading it and stayed there for about 20 minutes. He thought about the coupling. I thought about the way that when you know something true, you know it. It sits in you like a stone in still water, and you can either reach in and pick it up, or you can walk away and leave it there. The primary rotational coupling between your torso drive and your lower stabilization array, he said. It's running compensatory cycles. The imbalance has created an oscillation pattern. The software keeps trying to correct a mechanical problem by making software adjustments, which makes the oscillation worse. Eventually, the feedback loop becomes unrecoverable, and the system shuts down to protect the components. Silence. The kind of silence that has weight. Victoria studied him. Harrison laughed not humorously, but with the particular sound of a man protecting territory. That is not, Harrison began. Show me your diagnostic report, Caleb said. Not to Harrison, to Victoria. Harrison took a step forward. Excuse me. James. Victoria said just his name. Nothing else. Harrison stopped. She looked at Caleb for a long moment. Then she turned and walked back into the lab and held the door open. Come in, she said. The lab was large and white and loud, with the particular quiet of people who are supposed to be solving a problem and aren't. 11 engineers, 4 project managers, 3 board observers who had arrived sometime in the previous hour and were standing near the far wall with the specific posture of people whose money was in the room and who were not happy about the situation. And Caleb, in his gray uniform, with his toolbox. He walked to the diagnostic terminal and looked at the report Harrison handed him. He read it for 45 seconds. Then he looked at the prototype. Can someone pull the mechanical log from the last 72 hours, he said. Not the system log, the mechanical performance log. Why would you? One of the project managers started. Cynthia, Victoria said. Pull the log. Cynthia pulled the log. Caleb looked at it. He traced his finger down the data column without touching the screen. An old habit, something he used to do when he was running his own lab, when data was everything, and you didn't want fingerprints on the glass. There, he said. 11 days ago. The coupling shows a variance of 0.04 millimeters, small, easily dismissed. 11 days of operation at 300+ cycles per day. By yesterday morning, that variance had compounded into something the stabilization array couldn't manage. He looked up. The room was doing the thing rooms do, when a truth arrives that nobody wants to fully receive. Everyone was listening very hard, while simultaneously not wanting to appear like they were listening very hard. Harrison crossed his arms. The software diagnostic didn't flag any mechanical. Because the software was designed to diagnose software, Caleb said evenly. It doesn't know what it doesn't know. The statement landed in the room with a particular kind of quiet authority that had nothing to do with volume. Victoria was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. One of the board observers, older man, silver hair, the kind of suit that communicated its own price tag, stepped forward. Who is this person? He said, addressing Victoria without looking at Caleb. He's the person who just diagnosed the problem, Victoria said. He's wearing a maintenance uniform. I can see that, Gerald. Victoria. Gerald. She said it the same way she'd said Harrison's name, just the word nothing attached to it, but the word carried the entire sentence inside it. Don't. She turned to Caleb. Can you fix it? The room held its breath. Caleb looked at the prototype. He thought about the coupling. He thought about the parts he'd need, some of which were definitely in the supply room on the second floor, because he'd inventoried everything in this building 17 months ago, and his memory for inventory was one of the many things about himself he'd stopped advertising. He thought about Sophie. He thought about the $47,000. He thought about the letter from the insurance company. Yes, he said. Harrison made a sound. Ma'am, this is completely inappropriate, he said. And now the flatness was gone, and there was something underneath it, something that sounded like fear dressed up as professionalism. We have protocols. We have procedures. You can't allow an unqualified... James, Victoria said. What is your current solution? Harrison opened his mouth, closed it. We're exploring several. You've been exploring for 48 hours, she said. The investor meeting is in 18 hours. What is your current solution? Harrison said nothing. Victoria looked at Caleb. 18 hours, she said. Can you do it in 18 hours? Caleb looked at the robot. He looked at the coupling. He ran the math in his head, the real math, the felt math that lived in his hands and his chest, and the years he'd spent knowing machines from the inside. 12, he said. If I have access to the supply rooms and someone to hand me parts. Victoria nodded once. Done. That was when Gerald stepped forward again, and Gerald was the kind of man who did not get stepped over twice in the same conversation. Victoria, he said. And now the suit was doing its full work. The voice underneath it had authority and money, and the particular weight of a man who believed both of those things gave him jurisdiction over other people's decisions. I have to strongly object to Gerald. She turned to face him fully. Do you want the investor meeting to happen tomorrow? Of course Then we need the prototype functional. Do you have a better option than the one standing in front of us? Gerald looked at Caleb. He did the same thing Harrison had done: the uniform, the toolbox, the assessment. But Gerald's assessment took half a second less, which meant his conclusion was even faster, which meant his conclusion was more about what he assumed than what he saw. Absolutely not, Gerald said. The liability alone. I'll take the liability, Victoria said. You can't just... I own 43% of this company, she said, and her voice was completely calm. And I am telling you that I am taking personal liability for this decision. Are we done? Gerald's face did something complicated. He stepped back. Victoria turned to Caleb, and this was the moment, the one Caleb would think about later, the one that didn't make sense on paper, but made complete sense in the room where something shifted in her expression. The hard precision softened just at the edges, just for a second, and underneath it was something that might have been curiosity or respect, or just the simple rare acknowledgement that she was looking at someone she hadn't seen before. So, she said, what do you want if you fix it? The room waited. Caleb had thought about this for exactly 30 seconds, starting from the moment she'd asked, can you fix it? He'd run through every version of the answer. He'd thought about asking for a job, he'd dismissed it, because he'd been given jobs that disappeared before, and he'd learned not to build anything on sand. He'd thought about asking for money, just the amount he needed, clean and direct. He'd decided on direct. My daughter needs surgery, he said. The insurance company won't cover the specialist. $47,000. Nobody laughed. Not yet. They were still processing. If I fix your machine, Caleb said, I want $47,000. Nothing more, nothing less. Victoria looked at him. That's all. That's everything, he said. To me. She studied him. She was looking for something. The angle, the hidden ask, the setup for a larger negotiation. He knew she was looking for it, because everyone who lived at her altitude looked for it, because at her altitude, everything had an angle. She didn't find it, because there wasn't one. All right, she said, and then whether it was stress, or the late hour, or the genuine absurdity of the situation, the corner of her mouth moved and she said it. The thing she said. The thing nobody was going to forget. Fix my machine, and I'll belong to you. She said it lightly, like a joke. Like the kind of thing that sounds outrageous enough to be obviously not serious. The engineers laughed. The project managers exchanged glances. One of the board observers made a sound that was technically a chuckle. Gerald looked appalled. Victoria looked like she expected Caleb to flush red and go back to his toolbox. Instead, Caleb looked at her directly, and without smiling, without any performance at all, with just the quiet weight of a man who had learned to say what he meant, because he had no time left for anything else, he said, "Put that in writing." The laughter stopped. Just stopped. Like someone had reached into the room and turned a dial. Victoria stared at him. For a full 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then something happened in Victoria's face, something quick and private and genuine, and it might have been the first real thing Caleb had seen from her since she walked off that elevator. She reached for the legal pad on the nearest table. She uncapped a pen. She wrote 4 lines. She signed her name at the bottom and held it out to him. Caleb read it. He folded it. He put it in the chest pocket of his gray uniform. "I'll need the supply room keys," he said, "and someone to hand me parts who won't talk." Victoria looked at the room. "Everyone out," she said. Everyone left. Everyone except Victoria. She stayed. She didn't explain why, and Caleb didn't ask, and that was the beginning of something, not a romance, not yet, not anything with a name, but a kind of shared space that 2 people enter when the performance disappears, and all that's left is the work. Caleb opened the access panel on the prototype's lower torso section. He examined the coupling with a handheld sensor and confirmed what he already knew: the variance, the compensatory cycles, the compounded oscillation. He made a list of parts. He handed it to Victoria without ceremony. "I need these from the second floor supply room, shelf C units 14 through 17. And there should be a calibration tool on the bench in the mechanical testing room. It looks like a silver T-wrench with a digital gauge on the handle. Victoria looked at the list. You know our inventory, she said. I inventoried this building when I started working here. Why? Because I fix things, he said, turning back to the robot. And you fix things better when you know where everything is. She left without another word. She came back 8 minutes later with every item on the list. Caleb looked at what she was carrying and nodded once. Thank you, he said. He went to work. For a while, neither of them spoke. Victoria watched him work the way that people who understand quality watch a craftsman, not with boredom, but with attention. She saw the way his hands moved, deliberate, precise, but not tentative. There was no hesitation in them. There was a quality she recognized because she looked for it in every person she hired and rarely found it. In quite this form, the movement of someone who had done a thing so many times that the knowledge of it had moved from their mind into their body, into their muscle and bone and blood, so that thinking about it and doing it were no longer separate events. How long have you worked here? She asked. 17 months. Before that, he adjusted a contact point inside the coupling housing and checked the reading on the calibration tool. Various places, he said. Meaning I don't like to talk about it. She was quiet for a moment. Your daughter. How old is she? He paused just for a half second, and the pause was the most personal thing he'd done since entering the room. 8, he said. Her name is Sophie. What does she need the surgery for? He checked the calibration again. Adjusted. Checked again. Her left knee, he said. Growth plate issue. The local surgeon could do a basic procedure, but there's a specialist in Houston who can do it with significantly better long-term outcomes. Sophie does gymnastics. Another adjustment. Another check. She loves it. She's been doing it since she was 5. She's really good at it. He said the last sentence with a different quality in his voice. Quiet and full at the same time, the way people sound when they talk about something that matters to them at a depth they don't usually let anyone see. Victoria said nothing. She handed him the next tool before he asked for it. He looked at her. She was looking at the parts list. You anticipated what I needed next, he said. I read the list, she said. I could see the sequence. He looked at her for a moment, really looked maybe for the first time since she'd walked off the elevator. You have an engineering background, he said. Undergraduate degree. I went to business school instead. Why? Because I was better at business. A beat. And because being good at engineering in a room full of men who assumed I wasn't was exhausting. He turned back to the robot. Yeah, he said quietly. I know something about that. Sometime around 3 a.m., around the time that Caleb would normally be eating the sandwich Sophie had packed and reading whatever book she'd chosen for him. Victoria made 2 cups of coffee from the lab's machine and set one on the bench beside him without asking. He picked it up. Thank you. Don't thank me, it tastes like hot cardboard. He took a sip. It did taste like hot cardboard. It was the best coffee he'd had in about 3 years because it was the first cup anyone in this building had ever made for him. Can I ask you something? She said. You're going to anyway. She almost smiled. Almost. Why are you here? She said. Working maintenance. You clearly, the way you diagnosed that problem, the way you understand these systems. Why are you here? He set down the coffee. He reached into the coupling housing with both hands and made a micro-adjustment that required a particular combination of pressure and angle that took most engineers 5 years to develop and took Caleb about 40 minutes when he was 22 years old. Life, he said. That's not an answer. No, it's not. He checked the calibration. Perfect. He moved to the next section. I had a career, a real one. I designed a control system for advanced robotics that was... It was good. It was actually good. Some people thought it was more than good. What happened to it? Someone took it. Stole it. There's a version of what happened that uses that word, he said. Corporate acquisition, non-disclosure agreements, lawyers and paperwork, and the particular way that powerful people take things from people without power, without technically doing anything that can be called stealing in court. He paused. My wife died. We were in the middle of trying to fight it. After she was gone, I stopped fighting." Victoria was quiet. "I'm sorry," she said. "It was 4 years ago. That doesn't make it less." He looked at her. "No," he said. "It doesn't." She was quiet again for a moment. "The system you designed," she said carefully. "What was it for?" He tilted his head slightly. "Medical robotics," he said. The silence between them shifted. "Rotational coupling stability in high-precision surgical units," he said. Victoria set down her coffee cup. "What was it called?" He looked at her steadily. "The company that acquired it called it the Stirling-Moss Stabilization Protocol," he said. "But I designed it in my garage in Pasadena in 2018, and I called it something else." Victoria's face had changed. Not dramatically, not theatrically, just changed. Because the Stirling-Moss Stabilization Protocol was the foundational control system that Asterion Robotics had licensed for $1.3 million from a company called Redpath Technologies 3 years ago, and which formed the core of the prototype standing in the lab between them. And she knew with the particular clarity of someone who understood both business and engineering exactly what that meant. "Caleb," she said. "I know," he said quietly. "The protocol in this machine is mine," he said. "Was mine." He turned back to the coupling. "I'm not here for that tonight. Tonight I'm here for Sophie. Everything else can wait." Victoria stood very still. Then she did something that probably would have surprised everyone who worked for her. She picked up the next tool from the bench and held it out to him. And Caleb Brooks took it. And they kept working. The hours passed, the way hours do, when real work is happening, not slowly, not quickly, but with a kind of density, a weight each minute full to its edges with something purposeful. Outside the lab windows, Austin was doing what Austin did at 4 and 5 in the morning, sleeping unevenly, dreaming in neon, the highway sounds coming and going in long, slow waves. Inside the lab, a man in a gray uniform and a CEO in a blazer rebuilt an $80 million machine piece by piece. Victoria didn't leave. She could have. There was nothing in her role that required her to be there at 4 in the morning, handing a maintenance worker tools. She could have had any of her engineers deliver. She was the CEO. She ran 6 offices and 1,800 employees, and a company whose next 12 months would determine whether it became the most important medical technology firm in America, or a cautionary tale about ambition outpacing execution. She stayed because she couldn't leave. Not because of the machine. Not because of the investor meeting in 14 hours. She stayed because she was watching something she hadn't seen before. Something she hadn't expected to find in this building at 4 in the morning or anywhere else. Something she'd been unconsciously looking for without knowing she was looking for it. A person doing something they were born to do. Not performing it. Not explaining it. Not managing or presenting or optimizing for observation. Just doing it. Around 5 a.m. Caleb sat back from the prototype and looked at Victoria. "It needs to rest for 2 hours," he said. "The recalibrated coupling needs to settle. Then we run it." "Okay," she said. "You should sleep." "Should I?" "You have an investor meeting in." He checked the clock on the wall. 13 hours. She looked at him. "What about you?" "I have to pick Sophie up from my neighbors at 7. Get her to school by 8. Your neighbor watches her through the night. Mrs. Patterson. She's 73. She says it gives her something to do." He paused. "I pay her what I can. She says it's not enough. We disagree about that." Victoria was quiet. "You do this every night," she said. "Come here. Work until morning. Pick up your daughter." "Most nights." "And then what?" "Sleep a few hours while she's at school. Wake up. Make dinner. Help with homework. She goes to gymnastics on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I sit in the bleachers and watch. She does this one routine." He stopped himself. He looked at his hands. "Sorry," he said. "You don't need to hear." "No," Victoria said. "Tell me." He looked at her. "She does this one routine," he said. "At the end she lands this jump and she—" He shook his head. "She puts her arms out and she smiles at me from across the gym. Every time. Same smile. Like she's saying, "Did you see that? Did you see me?" I was quiet. "That's the whole thing," he said. "For me. That's the whole thing right there." Victoria looked at him for a moment. "Go get your daughter," she said softly. "I'll be here when you get back." He stood. He picked up his toolbox. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. "The protocol," he said without turning around. "That's mine. I don't want to fight. I'm tired of fighting. But I want you to know that you know." "I know," she said. He nodded once. He walked out. And Victoria Sterling stood alone in the lab with the prototype and the coupling and the folded piece of paper that Caleb had put in his chest pocket 2 hours ago. And she thought about what it meant that the foundational technology her company had built its future on had been designed by the man who fixed her lights and swept her floors. And she thought about how completely wrong she had been. And she thought about a little girl with her arms out in a gymnasium, smiling across the room. "Did you see that? Did you see me?" And she sat down on a stool, and she stayed very still for a long time. 7:43 in the morning, and Caleb Brooks was sitting in his car in the parking lot of Sophie's elementary school, watching her walk through the front doors, her backpack bouncing, and he was running on no sleep, and 4 cups of bad coffee, and the particular kind of adrenaline that only fathers understand, the kind that has nothing to do with excitement and everything to do with love, so big it makes you physically tired. Sophie had stopped at the door and turned around. She found him in the parking lot the way she always did, like she had a sensor tuned specifically to him, and she put her arms out wide and grinned and then disappeared inside. He sat there for another full minute. Then he turned the car around and drove back to Asterion Robotics, because Victoria Sterling had said she would be there when he got back. And in his experience, which was considerable and often painful, people who said things like that usually weren't. But something in the way she'd said it made him drive back anyway. He badged through the side entrance at 8:16, changed back into his gray uniform out of habit, walked to the lab. She was there, still in the same blazer. Her hair was slightly less perfect than it had been the night before, which on her looked less like exhaustion and more like evidence that something real had happened. She was standing at the control terminal with a tablet in one hand and a fresh coffee in the other. And when she heard him come through the door, she turned around and held up a paper bag from the bakery 3 blocks down the street. "I went out," she said. "There's an egg sandwich in there, and something with chocolate for Sophie if you see her before the surgery." He stopped walking. He looked at the bag. He looked at her. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know." He took the bag. He looked inside. She had gotten the sandwich and also a small chocolate croissant wrapped separately with a piece of tape holding a sticky note that said in her handwriting, "For Sophie. You've got this." He stared at the sticky note for a moment longer than he intended to. "The coupling should have settled," he said, finally folding the bag closed. "We should test it." "I already did a preliminary run," she said. He looked up. "It ran for 40 minutes without a single variance," she said. 0.001 millimeter fluctuation, well within tolerance. The oscillation is completely gone. The lab was quiet except for the ventilation system and the distant hum of the building waking up around them. Caleb walked to the prototype and ran his own check, not because he didn't believe her, but because he needed to feel it for himself, needed his hands to confirm what the data said. The coupling was perfect. He stood up slowly. He let out a breath that he realized he'd been holding since 7:45 the previous evening. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. And for a moment, standing in the early morning light of the lab, with the fixed machine between them and 17 hours of shared work behind them, neither of them said anything else. There was nothing to say. The kind of silence that follows real accomplishment isn't empty. It's full. Completely full of everything that was just done and everything it cost. Then the lab door opened, and James Harrison walked in, carrying his own coffee, and the expression of a man who had slept in his office and was prepared to resume being important, and he stopped when he saw Caleb standing at the prototype terminal. "What is he still doing here?" Harrison said. "Working," Victoria said. "The machine is—" Harrison looked at the terminal. He read the data. His face went through several stages. "It's running." "Yes," Victoria said. Harrison set down his coffee. He walked to the terminal and looked at the diagnostic data more carefully. He pulled up the coupling readings. He stared at them. He scrolled back through the overnight log. His jaw moved slightly like he was chewing on something he hadn't ordered. "This is the mechanical coupling," he said. "Yes," Caleb said. Harrison looked at him. "That's not where the failure was," he said. But his voice had changed. The flatness was still there, but something underneath it had cracked just slightly, just enough to let through a little of what was actually happening. Which was that Harrison was a smart man, looking at data that proved he had been wrong in front of his CEO. "It is where the failure was," Caleb said. Not unkindly, just factually. The compensatory software cycles were the symptom. The coupling variance was the cause. Harrison looked at the data again. He looked at Caleb. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He picked up his coffee and walked back out of the lab. Victoria watched him go. "He's not a bad engineer," she said quietly. "I know," Caleb said. "He's a very good engineer. He just looked in the wrong place." "That happens. To everyone," Caleb said, "including me." She looked at him. "When?" she said. "When did you look in the wrong place?" He was quiet for a moment. "When I thought signing the agreement with Redpath Technologies meant they'd protect what was mine," he said. "I looked at the contract, and I saw the money and the resources and the partnership language, and I thought I was looking at opportunity." He paused. "I was looking at the door closing." Victoria said nothing. "My wife saw it," he said. "Maya saw it before I did. She said Caleb read the acquisition clause again. And I said I had, and I said it was fine." He shook his head. "It wasn't fine." "What happened?" "Redpath Technologies was acquired by a larger firm 8 months after we signed. The Sterling Moss Protocol. My protocol went with the acquisition. New owners, new classification, new NDAs. My name came off the documentation in the restructuring. Officially a clerical error." He made a short sound that was not quite a laugh. "Unofficially a very convenient clerical error." Victoria set down her tablet. She turned to face him fully, and her expression had the particular quality of someone who is putting things together that have been separate for too long. "The firm that acquired Redpath," she said. "Was it Vantage Industrial Group?" Caleb looked at her. "Yes," he said. The temperature in the room did not change. Nothing visible happened. But something between them shifted the air pressure maybe, or the weight of what they were both now holding. "I know the Vantage acquisition," Victoria said carefully. "I was offered a position on their advisory board 3 years ago. I turned it down because their documentation practices were irregular." "Irregular is a word for it," Caleb said. "I didn't know about the protocol," she said. "I want you to know that. When we licensed the Sterling Moss system from Redpath's successor firm, I was given a full chain of documentation showing clean acquisition. I did not know there was a person behind it." "There's always a person behind it," Caleb said quietly. "Yes," she said. "There is." Another silence, different from the first one. "Caleb," she said, "what do you want me to do with this?" He looked at her. "Tonight," he said. "Nothing. Tonight you have an investor meeting to run. Make it good. The machine works. And after tonight," he picked up his toolbox. "Let me think about that," he said. She nodded. He walked toward the door. "Caleb." He stopped. "The $47,000, she said. "It's already transferred. I did it at 6 this morning." He turned around slowly. "You already? I called my finance director at 5:50 a.m. I had the routing information from your employee file. I hope that's not I should have asked first." She paused. "I didn't want to wait." He stood there. He was very still. "Check your account," she said. "If you want to verify before—" "I believe you," he said. "You don't have to." "Victoria." He said her name for the first time and she went quiet. "I believe you." She held his gaze. "Thank you," he said. He walked out, and she stood in the lab and thought about a man who had his name stolen and his wife buried and his career dismantled and had still shown up to someone else's building every night and fixed the things that were broken. And she thought that she had met a lot of extraordinary people in her life, and that most of them knew they were extraordinary. And that was the thing about Caleb Brooks that she couldn't get out of her head. He didn't seem to know it at all, or if he knew it once, life had convinced him to put it away somewhere quiet and not take it out again. She was going to fix that. She didn't know yet exactly how, but she was going to fix that. The investor meeting was in 9 hours. She had calls to make and presentations to finalize and 11 different crises to manage before noon. She was one of the most powerful young executives in America, and she had a company to run. She picked up her phone and made the first call. But first, she looked at the prototype running perfectly smoothly, quietly, and she let herself feel what she hadn't let herself feel in the past 48 hours, which was relief so deep, it was almost physical relief, and something else, something she wasn't ready to name yet. Then she got to work. The board observers arrived at 9:15, led by Gerald in his expensive suit, with the expensive gravity and the expression of a man who had gone home, slept 4 hours, and returned prepared to be right about something. He walked into the executive conference room, where Victoria was already seated with her senior team, and he looked around the table, and then he looked at the empty chair beside her. "Where's your maintenance man?" he said. "Working," Victoria said. "I want to address what happened last night," Gerald said, settling into his chair with the particular deliberateness of someone who has prepared remarks. "The liability exposure alone." "The prototype runs," Victoria said. "Full diagnostic zero variance ready for today's demonstration." Gerald paused. It was fixed. Last night, by 7 a.m., it had completed a 40-minute test run with performance metrics above the original design specifications. The table was quiet. One of the other board observers, a woman named Patricia Huang, who sat on 3 different technology boards and had twice declined to chair the Nobel Committee because she found the process politically exhausting, leaned slightly forward. "Above design specifications," she said. 0.012% better rotational stability than the original calibration, Victoria said. "We'll see it in the live demonstration this afternoon, but the data is already in your packets." Patricia looked at the packet in front of her. She opened it. She looked at the data. "Victoria," she said slowly, "these numbers are significantly better than anything we've seen in testing." "I know," Victoria said. "The coupling recalibration was done by someone who understood the mechanical system at a level the original engineering team didn't fully reach," Victoria said. "Not because the team wasn't excellent, because the person who fixed it has a particular kind of experience with this specific type of rotational coupling that is rare." Gerald was watching her. "The maintenance worker," he said. "His name is Caleb Brooks," Victoria said. "And yes." "Victoria, you cannot be serious about Gerald." She opened her own folder and slid a document across the table to him. "This is the original design documentation for the Stirling-Moss stabilization protocol. I pulled it from Vantage Industrial Group's archived acquisition files last night." She slid another document alongside it. "And this is a 2018 engineering report from a company called Advanced Kinetic Systems in Pasadena, California." Gerald looked at the documents. "I don't see what—" "Read the author line," Victoria said. He looked. He read. The room waited. Gerald looked up. "This says Caleb Brooks," he said. "Yes," Victoria said. "It does." Another document slid across the table. "This is the Redpath Technologies acquisition agreement from 2019, which absorbed Advanced Kinetic Systems and all of its proprietary technology, including the rotational coupling system that became the Stirling-Moss protocol, for which the original engineer received a one-time payment of $83,000 and signed a non-disclosure agreement, under terms that upon review by my legal team this morning, contained several clauses that a federal IP court would find irregular." Patricia Huang was now reading very carefully. Gerald had not moved. "The man cleaning your Victoria said, "designed the system that is the core of our prototype. That system was taken from him through a chain of corporate acquisitions that removed his name from the documentation and compensated him for a fraction of its value. He has been working night maintenance in this building for 17 months. The room did not make a sound. And last night, Victoria said, he fixed in 12 hours what our engineering team could not fix in 48. Using parts from our supply room and a calibration tool from the mechanical testing bench. Patricia set down the documents. She looked at Victoria with an expression that was harder to read than most people's, because Patricia Huang had seen everything and reacted to almost nothing. But there was something moving behind her eyes that might, in a lesser-controlled face, have been called astonishment. "What are you going to do?" Patricia said. "I'm going to do what should have been done a long time ago," Victoria said. Gerald picked up the acquisition document. He set it back down. He looked at the ceiling briefly. He looked at Victoria. "The liability," he said. But his voice had changed. It was quieter. "If this gets out, if the IP origin becomes public." "It will get out," Victoria said. "I'm going to make sure of that, properly, legally, with every document in order." She paused. This company was built on Caleb Brooks's work. The investors we're meeting with today are investing in a system he created. That's going to be the truth, whether we acknowledge it or not. "Victoria, I'm not asking for permission, Gerald," she said. "I'm telling you what is going to happen, and I'm giving you the opportunity to be on the right side of it before the meeting this afternoon." Patricia Huang put her documents back in order and folded her hands on the table. "I think," she said carefully, "that this is the most interesting board meeting I have attended in the last decade. And despite everything, despite the legal complexity and the liability and the implications for the company's documentation history." One corner of her mouth moved upward. That was the moment Gerald understood that the conversation was over. Caleb, meanwhile, was asleep in his apartment. He had gotten home at 8:45. He had showered and changed and sat down on the couch and looked at his phone at the banking app, at the number that was there. Now the $47,000 that represented Sophie's surgery, and her knee, and her gymnastics, and the particular way she put her arms out at the end of a routine, and smiled at him across the gym, and he had stayed very still for a long time. Then he had set the phone face down on the coffee table, and lain down, and closed his eyes, and been asleep in approximately 90 seconds. He slept until noon. His phone woke him at 12:03 with a call from a number he didn't recognize. He stared at it. It rang 4 times. He answered it. "Mr. Brooks." A woman's voice. Professional, clipped, not unkind. "This is Diane, executive assistant to Victoria Sterling. Ms. Sterling would like to know if you are available to attend this afternoon's investor demonstration. She says to tell you," a brief pause, the sound of paper, "that she would like you there, and that attendance is not a condition of any prior agreement." Caleb sat up on the couch. "What time?" he said. "The demonstration begins at 3 p.m. in the main testing auditorium on the 6th floor. He looked at the clock. 12:05. "I'll be there," he said. "I was there at 2:47. Not in his gray uniform. He didn't own many things that qualified as formal, but he had a dark blue jacket that Maya had bought him for a conference in 2017 that still fit, and he wore that with a clean shirt, and he stood near the back of the auditorium while the investors filed in and the executives arranged themselves in the professional choreography of a high-stakes product demonstration. He watched the prototype get wheeled into position. He watched the engineers do their pre-demonstration checks. He watched Harrison run the diagnostic and stare at the coupling readings and then look across the room with an expression that Caleb couldn't fully interpret from a distance, but that contained, he thought, something that had not been there the day before. Victoria walked out to the front of the room. She was in a different blazer. Same posture. Same precision. She looked out at the assembled investors, 31 people, representing several $billion of committed and prospective capital, and she said, "Before we begin the demonstration, I want to share something with you." The room settled. 3 years ago, she said, a man named Caleb Brooks designed a rotational coupling stability system in a garage in Pasadena, California. That system, through a series of corporate acquisitions, became the foundational control mechanism of the prototype you are about to see. The process by which it was acquired was legal. It was also deeply unjust. And Caleb Brooks has been working in this building as a night maintenance technician for 17 months. The room was extremely quiet. Last night when the prototype failed 48 hours before this demonstration, she said, Caleb was the person who fixed it. In 12 hours, alone, using parts from our supply room. She paused. He is in this room right now, she said. And I want him to know in front of every person in this building who has the ability to make things right that we know whose work this is and that we intend to make it right. 31 investors and 16 executives and 11 engineers turned and looked around the room. Caleb stood at the back in Maya's jacket. He had not expected any of this. He was very still. Patricia Huang, seated in the second row, turned and found him and looked at him for a long moment with her unreadable face, and then she nodded once, small and precise and absolutely genuine. Harrison was standing near the prototype. He was looking at Caleb. He held eye contact for 3 full seconds, which for Harrison was something close to an apology. And Victoria Sterling, standing at the front of the room in front of everything she'd built, looked at the man in the blue jacket at the back of the auditorium, and she said into the microphone for everyone to hear, "Thank you, Caleb." He felt it move through him. The words, the room, all of it. And he thought about Maya, and about Sophie, and about the patent documents in a box in his garage in Pasadena that he'd kept because you always keep the evidence, even when you think you'll never need it. And he thought about the coupling, and the oscillation, and the 12 hours in the lab, and the sticky note on the chocolate croissant, and the $47,000, and the gymnastics routine, and the smile across the gym. He did not cry. He was Caleb Brooks. He stood up straight. And then the demonstration began, and the prototype moved smooth, precise, perfectly calibrated, running on a system built by a man the world had decided not to see, and for the next 14 minutes it performed flawlessly in front of 31 investors who would later describe it as the most impressive product demonstration they had ever attended. And Caleb watched from the back of the room and felt for the first time in 4 years something shift inside him. Something that had been locked tight and cold and protected for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like when it wasn't. It felt like a door opening, just a crack, just enough to let the light in. After the demonstration ended and the applause had settled and the investors had moved into the reception area for the formal discussions that would likely result in the kind of commitments that transform companies, Victoria made her way through the crowd and found Caleb still standing near the back wall. She stood in front of him. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yes, I did," she said. "In front of everyone. Especially in front of everyone." He looked at her. "What happens now?" he said. "Legally. My team is already building the case. Vantage's acquisition practices are going to face scrutiny they're not going to enjoy. It'll take time. It'll be complicated. But the documentation exists, and my legal team is very good." "That's not what I asked," he said. She paused. "No," she said. "It's not. I asked what happens now, to me, to this." She met his eyes. "I want to offer you a position," she said. "Head of innovation for a new department. Full authority over mechanical systems research. Your name on everything that comes out of it." He was quiet. "I'm a maintenance worker," he said. "You're the person who designed the foundational technology of this company," she said. "Don't do that. Don't make yourself small. Not in front of me." Something moved across his face. "I've been small for a long time," he said. "It got comfortable." "I know," she said. "That's the most dangerous kind of comfortable there is." He looked at the prototype across the room, his design inside it, his work, his years. "Sophie's surgery is scheduled for 3 weeks from Tuesday," he said. "I know," she said. "I looked at the procedure. Dr. Anita Reeves in Houston. She's the best in the country for pediatric growth plate reconstruction. Sophie is going to be fine." He looked at her sharply. "You researched my daughter's surgeon. I research everything that matters," she said. Without apology, without softness either, just the plain truth of who she was. "She's going to be fine, Caleb. And she's going to do that routine again with both arms out, and she's going to look across the gym and find you, and you are going to be someone she deserves to be proud of. Not because you weren't before, because you are going to stop hiding." He looked at her for a long time. The reception was going on around them. Voices, glasses, the sound of handshakes and commitments being made, and they were standing in the small quiet of their own conversation, like an island in the middle of all of it. "You scare me a little," he said. "Good," she said. "Fear means you're paying attention. Is that something they teach in business school?" "No," she said. "That's something I figured out on my own." He almost smiled. She almost did too. "I'll think about it," he said. "The position." "Take the time you need," she said. "The offer doesn't expire." She started to turn away. "Victoria," he said. She stopped. He reached into the inside pocket of Maya's jacket. He held out the folded piece of paper, the one she'd written on 2 nights ago, 4 lines in her handwriting and her signature at the bottom. "You might want this back," he said. She looked at the paper. She looked at him. She did not take it. "Keep it," she said. "Consider it a reminder." She walked back into the reception. And Caleb Brooks stood alone at the back of the room in his dead wife's jacket, holding a piece of paper that said he was owed something, and he thought that maybe the time for being owed things was over, and what came next was something different. Something he didn't have a word for yet. But it felt in his chest like the beginning of something true. 3 weeks passed. The way weeks pass when something large is waiting at the end of them. Not slowly, not quickly, but with a kind of held breath each day, carrying more weight than the day before it. Caleb had not given Victoria his answer yet. He'd told Sophie about the surgery on a Tuesday night after gymnastics, sitting at the kitchen table with 2 bowls of cereal, because neither of them had been hungry for a real dinner. He'd explained it carefully, the way he explained everything to her directly, without softening it so much that she couldn't recognize the truth when it arrived. Dr. Reeves in Houston. 3 weeks from now. A procedure that would fix her knee properly, not just manage it. Sophie had listened with the particular focus she brought to serious things. The focus that still sometimes stopped. Caleb cold, because it was so completely Maya. The stillness, the processing, the refusal to react until she'd thought it through. Then she'd said, "Will it hurt?" "Some," he said. "After. But Dr. Reeves is the best there is." "How do you know?" "Someone I trust looked into it," he said. Sophie had stirred her cereal for a moment. "Is it the lady from your work?" she said. "The one who paid for it?" He looked at her. "Mrs. Patterson told me." Sophie said, not apologetically at all. "She said a rich lady from your company paid for the surgery. She said she wasn't supposed to say anything, but she said it anyway, because she thought I deserved to know." Caleb made a mental note to have a conversation with Mrs. Patterson. "Yes," he said. She's someone from work." "Is she nice?" He thought about Victoria handing him tools at 4 in the morning. He thought about the sticky note on the chocolate croissant. He thought about her standing at the front of the auditorium saying "Thank you, Caleb" into a microphone in front of 31 investors. "She's complicated," he said. Sophie nodded like that was a completely satisfactory answer. "Daddy," she said, "are you going to take the job?" He stared at her. "How do you know about Mrs. Patterson?" she said again. He sat back in his chair. "Sophie Patterson needs to find a different hobby," he said. "She watches a lot of news," Sophie said. "She says you're on it. She showed me on her tablet. There was a whole article about the investor meeting, and there was a picture of you in the back of the room in your blue jacket, and the article said the company was built on your work." Caleb had not seen the article. He had been deliberately not looking at his phone for 3 days. "What did the article say?" he asked, and his voice came out carefully, the way you carry something fragile. "It said you were a genius," Sophie said. "It said they stole your thing, the robot thing." She paused. "It said you deserved better." She looked at him across the cereal bowls with her mother's eyes. "I already knew that," she said. "You deserved better. I just didn't know about the robot part." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. He didn't say anything. "I didn't need to." The article Sophie was referring to had been published by a technology journalist named Marcus Webb, who had attended the investor demonstration and had apparently spent the subsequent 72 hours pulling every thread Victoria had publicly unraveled in that auditorium. The piece ran in a major tech publication under the headline, "The man who built a billion-dollar robot from a garage and then cleaned its floors for 17 months. It was 3,000 words long, and by the time Caleb finally looked at his phone on Thursday morning, it had been shared 400,000 times. His phone had 22 missed calls. 11 were from numbers he didn't recognize. 3 were from his sister in Phoenix, who he hadn't spoken to in 8 months. 1 was from a law firm in San Francisco. 1 was from a journalist at a different publication. 1 was from a number with a Washington, D.C. area code that he stared at for a long time without calling back. 1 was from Victoria. She had left a voicemail. He listened to it standing in his kitchen at 6:50 in the morning with Sophie still asleep down the hall. "Caleb, it's Victoria. I imagine your phone is doing something alarming right now. I want you to know that I didn't give Marcus Webb your personal information. He found the documentation through the public acquisition records we submitted to the IP review panel. I also want you to know that the legal filing against Vantage Industrial Group was submitted yesterday afternoon, and our team believes it is extremely strong." A pause. Not hesitation. Victoria Sterling did not hesitate, but a breath, the kind that precedes something said carefully. "I also want you to know that the board voted this morning, unanimously, on the innovation department. Your name would be on the door, not as a courtesy, as recognition of what was always true." Another pause. "Call me back when you're ready, or don't. The offer still doesn't expire. But Caleb, don't disappear. You've done enough of that." He listened to it twice. Then he called her back. She picked up on the second ring. "You saw the article," she said. "Sophie saw the article," he said. A beat. "What did she say?" "She said she already knew I deserved better." He leaned it against the kitchen counter. "She's 8 years old." "She sounds like someone worth working for," Victoria said. "She's the only person I've ever worked for," Caleb said. "Everything else has been adjacent." "Then work for her," Victoria said. "Take the position. Build something that has your name on it. Let Sophie grow up knowing her father didn't let them keep what they took." The kitchen was quiet. Down the hall, he could hear Sophie's alarm going off, the small electronic beep that she consistently slept through for 8 full minutes before finally surrendering to the morning. "I need to think about it," he said. "You've been thinking about it for 3 weeks, she said. Not unkindly, but directly. "I know," he said. "What are you afraid of?" she said. The question landed the same way it had in the lab that first night, clean and precise, and aimed at exactly the right place. "Losing again," he said. "Building something and having it taken. Or failing in a way that Sophie can see." "Those are 2 different fears," Victoria said. "I know that too. The first one, the IP. The documentation, my legal team is building a structure that will protect everything you create inside this company. Your name, your rights, your ownership. Ironclad. I will personally guarantee it." "And the second one," he said. "The second one," she said, "is the one that belongs to you. I can't fix it. But I will tell you this, the man who fixed my machine in 12 hours, when 23 engineers couldn't fix it in 48, is not a man who fails in ways people can see. He might fail. Everyone fails. But what he does after that is the part that matters, and I've seen what you do after that. You show up, in a gray uniform, every night, for 17 months. Caleb was quiet for a long time. Sophie's alarm beeped 8 more times. Then he heard the small sound of her getting up, the creak of her bed, the shuffle of her feet. "I have to make breakfast," he said. "I know," Victoria said. "I'll call you this afternoon," he said. "I'll be here," she said. "Haimada eggs." Sophie came out in her pajamas with her hair sideways from sleep and sat at the table and looked at the eggs and said, "Can I have toast too?" And he made toast and they ate together in the particular morning quiet that belongs only to people who live in the same small world. The quiet of 2 people who don't need to fill the space with words because the space itself is enough. After Sophie left for school, Caleb sat at the kitchen table with his coffee and the article on his phone and the voicemail from the DC number that he had not yet returned, and 22 missed calls and a legal filing in San Francisco and a job offer on the 6th floor of a building he'd been cleaning for 17 months. He sat there for 45 minutes. Then he got in his car and drove to Asterion Robotics. Not at 9 p.m. In the middle of the day, for the first time since he started working there. He badged through the front entrance instead of the side. He didn't change into his uniform. He took the elevator to the 6th floor. The receptionist at the executive level looked at him when he stepped off the elevator and did the same rapid assessment that everyone in this building had done since the first night. But this time, something different happened because she had seen the article, and the article had a picture, and the picture was of the man standing in front of her. "Mr. Brooks," she said, slightly flustered. "Do you have—" "I don't have an appointment," he said. "Is she in?" The receptionist looked at her screen. "She has a call in 4 minutes." "I'll wait," he said. He sat in one of the chairs outside Victoria's office. He looked at his hands. He looked at the hallway he'd mopped 17 months ago, when it still had a scuff mark near the 3rd door that nobody on the day crew had bothered with. The scuff mark was gone now. He'd taken care of it himself 3 weeks in with a specific type of floor compound that left no residue. The small victories of invisible work. 4 minutes later, Victoria's office door opened, and she looked out and saw him sitting there and said nothing for a full 2 seconds, which was a long time for her. "You came in the front," she said. "Seemed like the right door," he said. She stepped back and held the door open. He walked in. Her office was large and ordered, and looked like her everything in its place, nothing decorative that wasn't also functional. A window that faced the Austin skyline, and a desk that had 3 separate stacks of documents arranged by what he guessed was urgency. On the credenza behind the desk, there was one personal item, a small framed photograph of a woman who looked like Victoria, but older, standing in what appeared to be a garden. "Your mother," he said. "My grandmother," she said. "She built her first company at 53, retired at 70 and started another one." She sat down across from him. "She's the reason I'm not afraid of starting over." Caleb sat down. "I came to tell you yes," he said. Victoria looked at him. "Yes," he said again. "The position. I'll take it." She didn't smile, but something in her face, something careful and contained, shifted. "On conditions," he said. "Name them. Sophie's surgery is in 11 days. I need the first 2 weeks to be remote. I'll work, but I need to be available to her." "Done. My name on all documentation, not as courtesy credit, as primary inventor with legal backing. Already in the offer letter. And I want the maintenance team to get a salary review. All of them. Not because of me, because they've been underpaid for 2 years, and anyone who's actually walked this building at night knows exactly what they do to keep it running." Victoria looked at him. A beat. "You're negotiating on behalf of people who aren't in the room," she said. "Is that a problem?" "No," she said. "It's unusual." "They work hard," he said. "Nobody sees it." "I'll get HR on it this week," she said. She paused. "Anything else?" "Harrison," he said. She waited. "I don't want him pushed out," Caleb said. "What happened in the lab that's done?" "Most people in your position would want him gone," she said. "Most people in my position have been invisible long enough to know what it costs a room when you remove someone without understanding what they were actually doing," Caleb said. Harrison was protecting the team from what he thought was an outsider. "I might have done the same thing." "You would not have done the same thing," she said. "You don't know that." "I know enough," she said. "But Harrison stays." Agreed. She opened the desk drawer and took out a document. She slid it across the desk. He picked it up. It was the offer letter. 3 pages. His name at the top. His title, Director of Mechanical Innovation, Asterion Robotics. Compensation. That was. He looked at the number and looked at it again and set the paper down for a moment. "Victoria," he said. "Don't argue about the number," she said. "That number is what your work is worth," she said. "Has always been worth. We're not negotiating it down." He picked up the document again. He read all 3 pages. She waited. He reached into the pocket of his jacket, Maya's jacket, which he'd worn again without thinking about it until right now, and he did not have a pen. He almost said so. Then Victoria set a pen on the desk between them. He picked it up. He signed his name at the bottom of the document. He set the pen back down. Victoria took the document. She signed her own name below his. She slid one copy back across to him and placed the other in the folder on her desk. "Welcome to Asterion Robotics," she said. "I already work here," he said. "Differently now," she said. "Yes," he said. "Differently now." There was a knock at the office door. Her assistant opened it slightly. "Ms. Sterling, the Vantage call is in 5 minutes, and Mr. Whitfield from the legal team is on hold. Tell Whitfield I'll call him back in 20 minutes, she said. "The Vantage call I'll take on time." The assistant nodded and closed the door. Victoria looked at Caleb. "The call," he said. "Vantage. Their general counsel called this morning," she said, and her voice had shifted back to the precision, the hard edge, the CEO who walked like a verdict. "They want to discuss a settlement before the filing becomes public." "Before it becomes public," Caleb said. "Meaning they've seen the article." "Everyone has seen the article," she said. 400,000 shares and climbing. Vantage's stock dropped 3 points this morning. He sat with that for a moment. "What are you going to tell them?" he said. "That we're not interested in a settlement that protects their documentation history," she said. "What we want is a formal record correction. Your name reinstated on all derivative filings, a public acknowledgement, and damages." "Damages," he said. "You designed a system that generated conservatively $400 million in licensing revenue over 5 years," she said. "You received $83,000 and an NDA. The damages conversation is going to be uncomfortable for them." He was quiet. "Caleb," she said, "you deserve this. Don't make yourself small about it." He thought about what it cost him to believe that. "I'm working on it," he said. She nodded. He stood to leave. "One more thing," she said. He turned. She reached into the desk drawer again and took out something small. She set it on the desk. It was the sticky note from the chocolate croissant. The one that said, "For Sophie. You've got this." He looked at it. "I kept it by accident," she said. "It was still on my desk when I came in this morning. I don't know. I thought maybe she should have it. After the surgery. Something to put somewhere." He picked it up. He folded it carefully. He put it in the pocket of Maya's jacket next to the paper she'd signed that first night, the one he still hadn't thrown away. "Thank you," he said. "Go home," she said. "The real work starts Monday." He went home. High mod dinner. He helped Sophie with her math homework, which was fractions, and Sophie found fractions deeply personally offensive, which made him laugh for the first time in what felt like a long time. A real laugh surprised out of him by the passion with which his 8-year-old daughter argued that fractions were unnecessary, and whoever invented them should be held accountable. He thought, "I am going to be okay." He thought, "We are going to be okay." He didn't know yet what was coming. I didn't know about the call from Gerald that Victoria would receive at 10:15 that night after the Vantage settlement discussion had collapsed into something uglier than anticipated. After Vantage's general counsel had made very clear that they intended to challenge the IP filing aggressively, and had implied not explicitly, but clearly enough, that certain information about Caleb's 2019 NDA agreement contained language that could in their reading invalidate any claim he brought forward. I didn't know that Gerald would call Victoria and say in his careful boardroom voice, "We need to discuss how exposed this company is if Vantage decides to go public with the NDA language. Because if they're right about what he signed, this entire filing blows back on us, and on him." I didn't know that Victoria would sit in her office after that call for 11 minutes alone and then pull up the NDA agreement and read it again and find the clause Vantage was referring to and sit very still for another 5 minutes. He didn't know that the clause existed. But the clause existed, and it was going to change everything. At 9:17. The following morning, Caleb was at his kitchen table with coffee and Sophie's half-eaten breakfast plate and the fractions homework from last night, feeling for the first time in 4 years like something might actually go right when his phone rang. "Victoria." He answered immediately. "Good morning," he said. "Caleb." Her voice was different. Controlled, but the quality underneath was different, the kind of controlled that is holding something. "I need you to come in." He set down his coffee. "What happened?" he said. I need you to come in, and I need you to bring your copy of the NDA you signed with Redpath Technologies in 2019, if you still have it. His chest tightened. I have it, he said. What's wrong? A pause. I'll explain when you get here, she said. But Caleb, I need you to know something before you walk through that door. He waited. Whatever is in that document, she said. I am not walking away from this. I want you to know that before you know anything else. He absorbed that. I'll be there in 30 minutes, he said. He went to the storage boxes in the closet, the ones he'd never unpacked since moving to Austin, the ones that held the paperwork and the engineering records, and the last physical evidence of the life he'd built before it was taken, and he found the folder. He found the NDA. He read the clause Vantage had cited. He sat on the closet floor for a moment. Then he stood up. He drove to Asterion Robotics. He took the front entrance. He went straight to the 6th floor. Victoria was standing at her desk when he walked in, and the legal team's representative, a woman named Sandra Park, who had the contained ferocity of someone who had been in complicated rooms before and knew exactly what to do in them, was seated at the conference table with 3 documents open in front of her. Caleb put the NDA on the table. Sandra looked at it. She turned to the specific page. She read the clause. She looked at Victoria. Is it what they said? Caleb asked. Sandra set the document down. She folded her hands. She had the expression of someone about to say something true that they would rather not have to say. The clause as written, she said, is a broad IP assignment provision. It assigns not just the Stirling-Moss protocol, but, and this is the language Vantage is referencing, all substantially similar work created by you within a 5-year period following the agreement. Silence. 5 years, Caleb said. The agreement was signed in October 2019, Sandra said. 5 years would take us to October 2024. I started working here in January 2023, Caleb said. I didn't design anything. You diagnosed the prototype, Sandra said carefully. The fix you performed on the coupling. The recalibration methodology. Vantage is arguing that constitutes new proprietary work, falling under the substantially similar clause, which they believe means they have a claim on the diagnostic methodology and the fix itself. The room was very quiet. Victoria had not moved. They're saying, Caleb said slowly, that they own the fix I did on the machine. They're saying they may have a claim, Sandra said. This is not settled law. The clause is broad and it will be challenged. But it is in the document you signed. Caleb looked at the NDA. He looked at his own signature at the bottom. He thought about the garage in Pasadena and the control system, and Maya saying read the acquisition clause again, and himself saying it was fine. He thought about how much it was going to cost to be wrong about something for the second time. What does this mean for the filing? Victoria asked Sandra. Her voice was completely steady. There was something almost frightening about how steady it was. It complicates it significantly, Sandra said. If Vantage pursues the clause aggressively, they can potentially block the primary IP claim while litigation runs. That could take 2 years. 3. They have resources and they will use them. And in the meantime, Victoria said, in the meantime, the company's use of the prototype is legally defensible because the licensing chain is documented. But Caleb's personal claim on the original system is suspended effectively until the clause is resolved. Victoria nodded once. She turned to Caleb. He was looking at the NDA. Caleb, she said. He looked up. I told you on the phone, she said. I am not walking away from this. You might have to, he said quietly. I won't. Victoria. Caleb. She said it the way she said names, just the word, the whole sentence inside it. Stop. Do you trust me? He looked at her. He thought about 17 months of invisible work and a piece of paper with her signature and a sticky note for Sophie and a cup of hot cardboard coffee at 3 a.m. Yes, he said. I trust you. Then let Sandra do her job, she said. And let me do mine. She looked at Sandra. What do we need? She said. Sandra had been waiting for exactly this question. We need every document in Caleb's possession from the 2019 agreement period, she said. Every email, every draft, every version of the control system documentation. We need to establish a timeline that shows the coupling fix is not substantially similar work under the clause. It's practical application of pre-existing knowledge. There's a strong argument there, but we need the paper trail to build it. I have everything, Caleb said. Both women looked at him. The boxes, he said. In my closet. I never threw any of it away. Every email, every draft, every version. I kept it because Maya told me to keep it. She said keep everything, even when you think you'll never need it. Sandra leaned forward. Everything from 2018 and 2019. Everything, Caleb said. Sandra looked at Victoria. That, she said, changes the conversation significantly. Victoria looked at Caleb. Something moved in her face. Not relief, not quite, but the particular expression of someone who just felt the ground become slightly more solid under their feet. Go get the boxes, she said. All of them. Every single one. He stood. He stopped at the door. Victoria, he said. She looked at him. Maya told me to keep the documents, he said. 4 years ago, when I thought it was over, when I was ready to just let it go and move on. She made me keep them. He paused. I used to think that was just her being careful. Victoria waited. I think now, he said, that she was being right. He walked out, and Victoria Sterling stood in her office with Sandra Park and the NDA and the 5-year clause and everything that was complicated and everything that was at stake, and she thought about a woman she had never met, a woman who had packed a peanut butter sandwich and a book and a note for her husband. Every night, a woman who had said, keep everything, and meant it in every direction, and she thought that some people leave things behind that are more powerful than anything they could have said out loud. She picked up her phone. She had 4 calls to make before noon. She made all of them. He brought 4 boxes. They were the kind of boxes that moving companies sold in packs of 10 brown, slightly crushed at the corners, sealed with the same tape he'd used 4 years ago when he packed up the garage in Pasadena the week after Maya's funeral, and told himself he was being practical, and knew even then that he was lying. Practical people throw things away. Practical people don't carry 4 boxes of engineering documentation across 2 states and store them in a closet behind a daughter's winter coats and a broken humidifier they kept meaning to fix. He'd kept them because Maya said keep everything. And because letting go of those boxes felt in some way he couldn't articulate, like letting go of the last argument they'd had together. The one she was right about. The one he hadn't finished yet. Sandra Park met him in the lobby at 1:15 in the afternoon and looked at the 4 boxes and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, all of this is from 2018 and 2019. 2017 through 2020, he said. I kept everything from the design period forward. She looked at him with the expression of a lawyer who has spent a career working with incomplete documentation and is now looking at the opposite problem. My office, she said. Now. They spent 4 hours going through the boxes, Sandra and 2 of her associates. All 3 of them in the particular focused silence of people, dismantling and reassembling a legal argument in real time, while Caleb sat across the table and answered questions and located documents and occasionally explained the technical context of something that looked to a non-engineer like identical notation, but was in fact the difference between a prototype and a final design. At 3:47, Sandra held up a single sheet of paper. This email, she said. November 2017, you sent it to your wife. Caleb looked at it. I remember that, he said. I was trying to explain the coupling concept. She wasn't an engineer. I used to explain things to her because it helped me think. You described the rotational stability principle in plain language in this email, Sandra said. Specifically the oscillation feedback problem and the mechanical solution. 14 months before the Redpath agreement was signed. Yes, Caleb said. This establishes the concept predates the agreement by over a year, Sandra said, which means the clause cannot apply to it because the work was not created within the 5-year window. It was created before the agreement existed. Caleb looked at her. That's good. That, Sandra said, is very good. That is the document that tells Vantage their clause argument collapses. She set it down carefully. Your wife saved your work. He sat with that. He looked at the email. His own words in a font he'd used on a laptop he no longer owned, sent to an address that no longer existed, to a woman who was no longer alive. And he thought about Maya reading it on whatever night he'd sent it, probably in bed with her reading glasses on, probably making the small sound she made when she was concentrating. And he thought about her understanding exactly what it meant. Even if she couldn't have told you the engineering details, understanding it the way she understood everything about him from the inside. Yeah, he said quietly. She did. Sandra gave him a moment. Then she said, I need to make 3 calls. This changes our position significantly. She left the room. Caleb sat alone with the 4 boxes and the documents spread across the conference table, and a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, and the email from November 2017 sitting on top of the nearest pile. He picked it up. He read it. His own words to Maya, explaining the machine, explaining the idea, the way he always explained things to her, carefully, without condescension, because she was the smartest person he knew, and she deserved the actual explanation, not the simplified version. He'd written, the problem with most rotational systems is that they fight against themselves. The solution isn't to make them stronger, it's to make them listen to each other. He'd written that to his wife about an engineering concept, and she'd written back, that sounds like most marriages. And he'd laughed, and she'd been right. And the next morning, he'd gone back to the garage and reworked the design with that thought in his head, and the system had clicked into place, like something that had been waiting to be found. He folded the email. He put it in the pocket of Maya's jacket with the other papers. The pocket was getting full. Victoria called at 4:30. Sandra briefed me, she said. The November 2017 email. Yes, he said. Are you all right? The question surprised him. Not because it was unexpected from her, she'd surprised him before, but because of the particular quality of it. Not, are you legally okay? Not, are you professionally prepared? Just, are you all right? I'm working on it, he said. That's honest, she said. You told me not to make myself small, he said. I'm trying to extend that to the emotional part too. A brief silence. That's harder, she said. Much harder, he said. Caleb. She paused. I want to tell you something about the call with Vantage this morning. Sandra said it went badly. It went exactly as expected, she said. Their general counsel's name is Richard Parrish. He's been in corporate IP litigation for 22 years. He is very good at making people feel like the ground under them is less solid than it appears. And, he said something, she said. He said, and I want you to hear this directly. He said that the cleanest resolution for everyone involved would be if you accepted a revised compensation package and withdrew your personal claim. He said, and I'm quoting, the man had his chance. He signed away his rights. The market has moved on. Caleb said nothing. I want you to know what I told him, Victoria said. What did you tell him? I told him that the man he was describing had just repaired an $80 million prototype in 12 hours using parts from a supply room, and that if Vantage wanted to explain to a federal court why the inventor of the Stirling Moss protocol was cleaning floors in the building where his own technology was being used, I would be delighted to help them make that argument. Caleb let out a breath. Then I told him, she continued, that we had located documentation predating the 2019 agreement by 14 months, establishing clear prior art, and that if his client wanted to discuss a reasonable resolution before that documentation became part of the public court record, they had 72 hours. Silence. Did he respond? Caleb said. He asked for the weekend, she said, which means he called his client the moment we hung up. And his client is scared, Caleb said. His client's stock dropped another 2 points this afternoon, she said. So yes. He stood at the window of the conference room. Austin below him, the late afternoon light, doing what it did in October in Texas, turning everything amber and long-shadowed and briefly achingly beautiful. Victoria, he said, why are you doing this? The question came out before he'd decided to ask it. She was quiet for a moment. "What do you mean?" she said. "You could have, when the NDA clause came up, you could have protected the company, separated Asterion from my personal claim, offered me the job, let the legal fight be mine to run, kept your distance from Vantage." He paused. "That would have been the smart business decision." "Yes," she said. "But you didn't do that." "No." "Why?" Another pause. Longer. "Because smart business decisions are the ones I make between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. with my legal team and my board and my documentation," she said. "And this is something else." "What is it?" he said. "I don't know yet," she said. "But I know it's something else." He stood at the window with the phone against his ear, and the amber light coming through the glass, and the email in his pocket, and the 4 boxes on the table behind him. And he thought that he had not expected when he walked through the side entrance of this building 17 months ago in his gray uniform to be standing here. He had not expected any of this. "Sophie's surgery is in 4 days," he said. "I know," she said. "I want to be focused on that," he said. "Entirely. Whatever happens with Vantage, I need 4 days where that's not the thing." "Absolutely," she said. "Sandra has the documents. The 72-hour clock is running without you. Go be Sophie's father." "Okay," he said. "Caleb." "Yeah. Tell her the croissant was from someone rooting for her." He closed his eyes briefly. "I will," he said. He went home. The next 4 days had the quality of held breath. The particular tension of waiting for something important while trying to maintain the ordinary rhythms that a child needs. The meals and the homework and the Tuesday gymnastics practice that Sophie insisted on attending, even though the surgery was Thursday and her coach had offered to excuse her, and Sophie had said with complete seriousness, "I want to do the routine one more time before I can't for a while." So, Tuesday evening. Caleb sat in the bleachers of the gymnastics center in his regular spot, 3rd row slightly left of center, the spot where Sophie could find him without looking, and he watched her do the routine. She was precise. She was focused. She had Maya's way of inhabiting a task completely, of being so entirely present in what she was doing that everything else disappeared. She moved through the routine with the particular grace of someone who had done something so many times that it had become part of them. And at the end, she launched into the final jump, and she landed it, and she put her arms out wide, and she turned and found him in the bleachers, and she grinned. That grin. That specific, complete, aimed directly at him grin. He put his arms out too, just slightly an echo of hers, and she laughed and dropped her arms and went back to her coach, and Caleb sat in the bleachers with his hands on his knees and thought, "This is what I fixed the machine for. This is what the $47,000 was for. This is what Maya kept the documents for." He drove Sophie to Houston on Wednesday evening. They stopped at a diner outside of the city because Sophie wanted pancakes for dinner, which Caleb could not argue with on any principled grounds, and they sat in the booth, and Sophie ate pancakes and told him about a book she was reading at school, that she had opinions about, strong opinions, the kind of opinions that 8-year-olds develop about books that feature injustice. And he listened and asked questions and thought that whatever happened next with Vantage, with Asterion, with any of it, this was the part he would not trade. This booth. These pancakes. This girl. The surgery was Thursday morning at 7:15. Dr. Anita Reeves was exactly what Victoria's research had promised, calm and precise, and the kind of person who explained everything twice, who made you feel not like you were surrendering your child to a system, but like you were handing her to someone specific who was going to bring her back. Caleb signed the forms. He sat in the waiting room. He did not check his phone for the first 2 hours. At 9:43, his phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. It said, "Thinking of you both today." He typed back. She went in at 7:15. Surgeon said 3 hours. "Victoria, I'll be here." He set the phone down. He picked up the novel Sophie had put in his bag before they left, a different one from last time, with the sticky note that said, "This one is sad in the middle, but good at the end. Daddy, I promise." And he read it, and she was right. It was sad in the middle, and he sat in the surgical waiting room of a hospital in Houston and read his daughter's book and waited. At 10:58, Dr. Reeves came out. "Mr. Brooks," she said. "Everything went perfectly. She's in recovery. You can see her in about 40 minutes. He stood up. Perfectly, he said. Textbook procedure, she said. She's going to be in a brace for 6 weeks, but the long-term prognosis is excellent. She'll be doing full gymnastics by spring. By spring. He sat back down. He put his face in his hands and stayed there for about 30 seconds, which was not crying exactly, but was the thing that happens in the body when relief arrives after it's been held back long enough. Then he picked up his phone. He called Victoria. She picked up on the first ring. "How is she?" she said. "Perfect," he said. "Textbook, spring gymnastics." He heard her exhale. "Good," she said. "Good." "Thank you," he said. "Don't," she said. "Victoria, don't thank me," she said. "I didn't do the surgery. I just made sure the right person did." "That's the whole thing sometimes," he said. "Making sure the right person does it." She was quiet. "Yes," she said. "It is." I went in to see Sophie at 11:45. She was groggy from the anesthesia, and her left leg was in the brace, and she looked smaller in the hospital bed than she did anywhere else in the world, which did something to his chest that he didn't have a word for. She opened her eyes when she heard him come in, and she said thick and slow from the medication, "Did I do good, Daddy?" "You did perfect," he said. "Like the routine." "Exactly like the routine." She closed her eyes again. "Okay," she said. "Okay, good." He sat beside her bed and held her hand and stayed there. At 2 in the afternoon his phone rang. Not Victoria. Sandra Park. "Caleb," she said. "Vantage called." He looked at Sophie, asleep, her hand in his. "What did they say?" he said, keeping his voice low. "They want to settle," Sandra said. "Before the 72 hours are up. Their general counsel says they want to resolve this privately." Privately meaning, they don't want the November 2017 documentation to become part of the public record, she said. Because if it does, it doesn't just affect your case. It opens their entire acquisition history to scrutiny. There are 3 other engineers whose work went through the same Redpath pipeline. Caleb looked at the ceiling. 3 others, he said. "That we know of," Sandra said. "I thought about 3 other people. 3 other garages, maybe. 3 other boxes in 3 other closets. 3 other sets of documents kept because someone said keep everything." "What are they offering?" he said. "Full name restoration on all Sterling Moss derivative documentation. A financial settlement Sandra described as, and she actually used the word, substantial. And a non-disparagement agreement." "Non-disparagement," he said. "Meaning I can't talk about it." "Meaning they want the story to stop where it is," Sandra said. He was quiet. "What does Victoria say?" he said. "She says it's your decision," Sandra said. "She wanted me to be very clear about that. This is your life, and your work, and your choice." He looked at Sophie. He thought about the 3 other engineers. He thought about what it meant to keep a story quiet. "No," he said. Sandra paused. "No to the settlement," she said. "Not with the non-disparagement clause," he said. "I'll take the name restoration. I'll take the financial settlement if it's fair. But I won't sign away the story, because it's not just my story." Silence. "Caleb," Sandra said. "If we reject the non-disparagement clause, they'll fight." "Let them fight," he said. "It could take years." "I know. The financial settlement they're offering." "Sandra," he said. "My wife told me to keep the documents. She didn't tell me to keep quiet about why." A long pause. "Understood," Sandra said. "I'll call them back." She hung up. He sat in the hospital room with Sophie sleeping and the brace on her knee and the afternoon light coming through the window blind in thin horizontal lines. His phone buzzed. "Victoria. A text Sandra told me. I just want you to know whatever you decide, I'm with you." He typed back, "I decided." No gag clause. 3 seconds. "Victoria, good." Then the 3 other engineers. "I know who they are. We're going to find them." He looked at the message for a long time. He typed, "Yeah, we are." He set the phone down. Sophie stirred. She didn't open her eyes, but she turned her head slightly toward him, and her fingers tightened around his hand, the way children do in sleep when they know you're there, Not consciously, but at some deeper level, the level that knows without thinking. He tightened his hand around hers. In the next 3 days, while Sophie recovered and Caleb slept in the uncomfortable chair beside her hospital bed, and ate vending machine sandwiches, and watched the same 3 kids' movies on the room's small television until he could have recited them from memory. 2 things happened that he didn't know about yet. The first was that Marcus Webb published a follow-up article. Not about Caleb this time. About Vantage Industrial Group and the 3 other engineers whose names Sandra's team had found in the acquisition records, a woman named Dr. Priya Nair, who had designed a pressure sensing system now used in medical devices, generating $60 million per year in revenue. A man named Robert Cho, who had developed an AI navigation algorithm now embedded in autonomous vehicle systems. A retired engineer named David Lester, 71 years old, who had spent 20 years believing that his work had been fairly compensated, and who, upon being contacted by a journalist, discovered that his invention was currently generating royalties for 4 different companies, none of which were paying him. The article ran on Saturday morning. By Saturday afternoon, it had been shared more times than the first one. By Sunday, 2 congressional offices had released statements about IP acquisition practices in the technology sector. By Monday morning, Vantage Industrial Group's stock had dropped 11 points in 2 days, and their general counsel had called Sandra Park 4 times. The second thing was smaller and happened in a hospital room in Houston on Saturday evening. Sophie had been awake for most of the day and was well enough to be irritable about the brace and bored with the movies and deeply opinionated about the hospital food, all of which Caleb took as excellent signs. He'd ordered her a real dinner from a restaurant 3 blocks away, and she'd eaten most of it and was now sitting up in the bed reading the book she'd brought, the one that was sad in the middle. "Daddy," she said without looking up. "Yeah. Is the lady the one from work? Is she your girlfriend?" He looked up from his own book. "No," he said. "Does she want to be?" "Sophie. I'm just asking," she said, turning a page. "Mrs. Patterson thinks she does." "Mrs. Patterson," he said, "has a very active imagination." "She watches a lot of news," Sophie said. "There's another article about you and 3 other people. Mrs. Patterson texted me. I was going to have a very serious conversation with Mrs. Patterson about texting an 8-year-old in a hospital." "I know about the article," he said. "Is it good?" Sophie said. "For the other people?" he said. "I hope so, yeah." Sophie was quiet for a moment. "Daddy," she said, "are you happy?" He looked at her. She was looking at him over the top of her book. Not with a child's idle curiosity, with something more careful than that, the focused attention she brought to serious things. "I think I'm getting there," he said. "That's different from yes," she said. "You're right," he said. "It is, but it's the honest answer." She considered that. "Okay," she said. "I'll take honest." She went back to her book. He looked at his daughter in the hospital bed with her braced knee and her book, and her 8 years of accumulated wisdom about what an honest answer looks like, and he thought that he had done at least one thing completely right. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. Washington, D.C. area code. The same one from 3 days ago. He looked at Sophie. She turned a page. He answered the phone. "Mr. Brooks," said a voice he didn't recognize. "My name is Thomas Riley. I'm a senior counsel in the Senate Commerce Committee. We've been following the documentation your legal team filed against Vantage Industrial Group, and we'd like to speak with you, along with Dr. Nair, Mr. Cho, and Mr. Lester." Caleb was very still. "About what?" he said. "About a proposed amendment to federal IP acquisition law," Thomas Riley said. "We believe your case, all 4 cases, represents exactly the kind of systemic failure the amendment is designed to address." The hospital room was quiet, except for the sound of Sophie turning another page. "Mr. Brooks," Riley said. "Are you there?" "Yes," Caleb said. "I'm here." "Would you be willing to speak with us?" He looked at Sophie. She reached the sad part. He could tell because she went very still, the way she always went still at the sad part, and her brow furrowed slightly, and she held the book a little tighter, but she kept reading. "Yes," Caleb said into the phone. "I'll speak with you." He stayed on the call for 20 minutes. He answered questions carefully and honestly, and said several things he would not have said 2 months ago, including, "I don't want this to just be about me. If it's only about me, it changes one story. I want it to change the system." Thomas Riley said, "That's exactly what we're trying to do." When the call ended, Caleb sat for a moment. Then he texted Victoria. He typed, "The Senate Commerce Committee called." He set the phone down. 20 seconds later, I know. Riley called me first. I gave him your number. I hope that was okay. He smiled. He typed, "It was okay." Then Victoria. She replied immediately, "Yes." He sat in the hospital room with his daughter and the phone in his hand and everything that had happened in the last month. Sitting in him like something shifted, not resolved, not simple, not finished, but shifted the way furniture shifts in a room when you finally move the piece that was in the wrong place, and suddenly the whole room breathes differently. He typed, "Thank you. For all of it. For not walking away." He waited. She typed back 3 words. 3 words that were not, "You're welcome," and not, "Don't mention it," and not any of the things people say when they want to close a moment rather than hold it open. She typed, "Don't disappear, Caleb." He read it twice. Sophie looked up from her book. "Daddy," she said, "it gets better after the sad part, right?" He looked at his daughter. "Yeah, baby," he said. "It does. Promise." I thought about the email in his pocket. He thought about the coupling and the oscillation and the way that when a system is fighting against itself, the solution is not to make it stronger, but to make it listen to itself. He thought about a woman who told him to keep everything, and a woman who told him not to disappear, and a piece of paper in his pocket that was getting crowded with all the things that mattered. "Promise," he said. Sophie went back to her book, and in the quiet of that hospital room, Caleb Brooks felt the last of something very old and very cold. Finally slowly begin to let go. Sophie came home on a Tuesday. She walked through the apartment door on crutches, with the particular determined dignity of someone who had decided that crutches were not a limitation, but an accessory. And she went directly to her room and reorganized her gymnastics trophies, so that the newest space, the empty one she'd left deliberately on the second shelf, was visible from the doorway. Caleb stood in the hall and watched her do it, and didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say that the gesture hadn't already said better. She was planning for spring, high-mod dinner. She told him the hospital jello had permanently damaged her relationship with the color red. He told her the vending machine sandwiches had done similar things to his relationship with the concept of cheese. They ate together, and she did her homework, and he cleaned up, and the apartment had the particular texture of a Tuesday evening that is completely ordinary and completely extraordinary. At the same time, the texture of a life that is still here, still running, still theirs. He put her to bed at 9. He sat at the kitchen table. He had been back at Asterion for 4 days, officially formally, in his new office on the 6th floor, with his name on the door, in letters that were still slightly surreal to look at directly. The innovation department was 3 people right now. Caleb, a mechanical engineer named Tessa, who had transferred from the prototyping team and had the useful quality of disagreeing with him respectfully and often correctly. And a recent graduate named Marcus, not the journalist. A different Marcus who was 24 years old and reminded Caleb painfully of himself at that age before everything in the best possible way. They had been working on something Caleb had been thinking about for 2 years in the back of his mind during the quiet hours of the night shift. A second-generation coupling system that addressed not just the oscillation problem, but the entire structural philosophy of how rotational systems communicated with each other. The principle he described in the 2017 email to Maya. The solution isn't to make them stronger. It's to make them listen to each other. He'd told Tessa and Marcus about it on their first morning together. Tessa had looked at the preliminary notes and said, "This is either going to be revolutionary or completely wrong." "That's the right range," Caleb said. Marcus had said nothing for a moment. Then he'd said, "Can I ask how long have you been thinking about this?" 2 years, Caleb said, "while I was cleaning the floors." Marcus had looked at him for a moment, with an expression Caleb couldn't quite read, and then he'd turned to his laptop and started building the first simulation model, and that was the beginning. Sitting at the kitchen table that Tuesday evening, Caleb opened his laptop and reviewed the latest simulation results. The numbers were good, better than good. The preliminary model suggested a 30% improvement in stability performance over the current generation, which meant in practical terms that the surgical robots using the system could operate with a level of precision that the current generation couldn't reach. Surgeons who could go places instruments currently couldn't. Procedures that were currently too risky to attempt. He thought about Sophie's knee. He thought about Dr. Reeves and what it meant to be the best person for a specific kind of work. He thought about the system he'd designed in a garage in Pasadena while explaining things to his wife by email, and he thought that maybe the whole long strange detour of the last 4 years had brought him to exactly the place the work needed him to be to take the next step. He saved the file. He closed the laptop. He went to bed for the first time in weeks without lying awake in the dark running through the list of things that might go wrong. The Senate Commerce Committee hearing was 3 weeks later. Caleb drove himself to Washington, D.C. He had been offered a car service by Thomas Riley's office and had declined because driving was the thing he did when he needed to think, and he had a lot of thinking to do. 15 hours from Austin, stopping twice, arriving at the hotel the evening before the hearing. Victoria flew in separately. She was testifying in a different capacity as a CEO who had discovered IP misclassification within her own licensed technology as a business leader with direct knowledge of the Vantage acquisition chain. The committee wanted the technical inventor and the industry executive in the same room, which was, as Sandra had pointed out, exactly the right instinct. They had dinner the evening before the hearing. Not a working dinner. Not a strategy session. Just the two of them at a restaurant near the hotel that was quiet and not expensive and had good food, which Victoria said was her primary criterion for any restaurant, which surprised him because he'd half expected her to have a preferred table at places that required 3 months' notice. "You thought I was more high maintenance than this," she said. "I didn't say that," he said. "You thought it," she said. "I could tell by the face you made when I said the restaurant name." "I didn't make a face." "You made a face," she said. She was not wrong. He smiled. Actually smiled the full version, the one that had been uncommon enough in the past 4 years that it still felt slightly foreign on his face. She looked at him when he smiled. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him in the lab that first night, but different now because the context had changed. The things she was seeing were the same things that had always been there. She was just seeing them without the gray uniform in the way. "How is Sophie?" she said. "Reorganizing her trophy shelf for spring," he said. "That sounds exactly right," she said. "She asked me again if you were my girlfriend," he said. He said it without planning to say it. It came out of the same place that honest things come from when you've stopped performing. Victoria looked at him. She picked up her water glass. "What did you tell her?" she said. "I told her you were complicated," he said. "Same as last time." "That's accurate," she said. "I know," he said. "I don't mind complicated." She set the glass down. "Caleb," she said. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "I know the situation. I know what this is and what it isn't yet. I'm not—" He paused. "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I said that to an 8-year-old and I meant it." She was quiet. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "The other part. The part that isn't work." "Neither do I," he said. "I haven't done it since Maya." "That's a significant gap," she said. "Yes," he said. "But I'm learning that significant gaps don't mean closed doors. They just mean you open the door more carefully." She looked at him across the table, and something in her face did what it did. Sometimes softened just at the edges, just enough to show what was underneath the precision and the control and the particular armor that a woman builds when she has spent a decade being underestimated and overworked and respected in a way that always has quotation marks around it. "I think," she said carefully, "that whatever this is, I don't want to stop it." "Neither do I," he said. They sat with that for a moment. Then she picked up the menu and said, "What are you ordering?" and he said he wasn't sure, and she said the pasta was supposed to be excellent, and he said he'd have the pasta, and they ate dinner and talked about the hearing preparation, and about Sophie's new book, and about Tessa's latest simulation notes, and about absolutely nothing that required a label or a definition or a conversation that either of them was ready to finish. It was the best evening Caleb had spent in 4 years. I didn't say that, but he thought she knew. The hearing room was larger than he'd expected. Not the chamber itself, which he'd seen photographs of, and which matched the photographs, but the weight of it, the particular gravity that certain rooms accumulate from the things that have been decided in them over time, the way they hold history in their walls, and ask you without words to be equal to it. Caleb sat at the witness table with Dr. Priya Nair on his left and Robert Cho on his right. David Lester sat at the end of the row, 71 years old, in a suit that was slightly too large for him now, in the way that suits sometimes are on men who have gotten thinner with age. And he sat up straight and held his prepared statement with both hands and looked at the committee members with the particular expression of a man who had waited a long time to be in this room. Victoria sat behind them in the gallery section, reserved for industry witnesses. She would speak in the second session. She was in a dark blazer, same as always, but she had the stillness of someone who is completely prepared and completely present. And when Caleb turned briefly before sitting down, she met his eyes and nodded once. He sat down. Thomas Riley called the session to order. The committee chair, a senator from Ohio named Carla Marsh, who had the reputation of asking the questions that the other senators wanted to ask, but were afraid to, looked at the 4 people at the witness table and said, "We appreciate all of you being here. I want to be direct about what this committee is trying to understand. Not the legal details, we have lawyers for that. We want to understand what it cost, what it actually cost the 4 of you. So I'm going to ask you to start there." She looked at Caleb. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "you designed a system that is currently generating conservatively $400 million in annual revenue across multiple industries. You received $83,000. Tell me what it cost." He had prepared a statement. He had 3 pages of carefully organized language that Sandra and the committee's counsel had reviewed and approved, and which covered every relevant fact in the correct order with the appropriate technical context. He looked at the 3 pages. He set them face down on the table. "It cost me my name," he said. "First, the thing I'd built with my name on it stopped having my name on it. And that sounds like a small thing, until you understand that your name on your work is the proof that you existed in a specific way, that the thing you made in your garage at 2 in the morning when everyone else was asleep was real, and it was yours." Senator Marsh was looking at him. "It cost me the fight," he said. "I was in the middle of fighting for it when my wife died. Maya. She died in October 2019, 1 year after we signed the agreement. And when she was gone, I couldn't hold the argument anymore. I put it down. I picked up my daughter and I moved to Austin, and I took the first job I could find that had stable hours, and for 17 months that job was maintaining the building where my own technology was being used." The room was very quiet. "I want to be clear that this is not a story about being a victim," Caleb said. "I made choices. Some of them were wrong. I signed a document without reading one clause carefully enough because I was 26 and I was excited, and I thought good intentions were sufficient protection." He paused. "They're not. And the system we have right now makes it very easy for people with more resources and more lawyers to rely on the fact that people like me will make that mistake and will not have the tools to recover from it." He picked up the 1 page he'd decided to use. "I had 4 boxes of documents in my closet," he said. "My wife told me to keep them. Because of those boxes, and because of the people in this room who are willing to listen, I am sitting here today. But I am sitting here because I got lucky. Because a CEO who could have protected her company's position chose not to. Because a journalist asked the right questions. Because my wife's instinct turned out to be right 4 years after she was no longer alive to know it." He set the paper down. "The other 3 people at this table were not lucky in the same way. Their boxes are still in their closets. Their names are still off their documentation. And there are more people, we don't know how many, but we know there are more who never kept the boxes at all." Senator Marsh was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "what do you want this committee to do?" "Make it harder," he said. Make it harder to take someone's name off their work and call it a clerical error. Make it harder to bury the prior art documentation in an acquisition chain. Make it mandatory that inventors are notified personally when their work is transferred. Not just the company that holds the contract, but the person whose name was supposed to be on it. He paused. And make the penalty significant enough that the calculation changes. Right now, the math works against the inventor every time. The cost of the acquisition is low, and the cost of the fight for the inventor is high. Change the math. The room held the weight of that. Then Senator Marsh looked down the table at David Lester and said, "Mr. Lester, would you like to add anything?" David Lester looked up from his prepared statement. He was 71, and his hands were slightly unsteady from the Parkinson's he'd mentioned to Caleb briefly in the hallway before the session, and he had the expression of a man who has rehearsed something so many times it has worn grooves. But he set the statement aside. "I spent 20 years thinking my work had been fairly compensated," he said. 20 years. I told my grandchildren about it, the navigation algorithm, the way I worked it out, the satisfaction of building something that worked. I told them it was bought fairly and used well." His voice was steady. "Last month, a journalist told me it was generating $11 million a year in licensing revenue for a company I'd never heard of. My grandchildren asked me if I was angry." He paused. "I told them I was. But I also told them that the most important thing wasn't the money. It was the record. I wanted the record to be correct. I wanted someone somewhere to write down that it was mine." He looked at the senator. "That's all. Just write it down correctly. That's what we're asking." Senator Marsh said, "We will." She said it with the particular flatness of a statement that has weight behind it. The session ran for 3 hours. Victoria testified in the second session and was precisely as effective as Caleb had expected, which was completely. She spoke with the authority of someone who understood both the business architecture and the human cost, and she named names and cited documentation and described the Vantage acquisition chain in a level of specific detail that made 3 committee members visibly uncomfortable, which Sandra had told them privately was exactly the goal. At one point, Senator Marsh asked Victoria directly, "Ms. Sterling, you are the CEO of the company that was using this technology. What was your responsibility in this situation?" Victoria did not hesitate. "To fix it," she said. "The moment I knew my responsibility was to fix it. I won't pretend I handled everything perfectly before I knew I didn't look hard enough at the origin documentation. That's on me. But once I knew the only question was how completely and how quickly." She paused. "I think that's the right question for any executive in this situation. Not how do I protect the company from the liability? How do I fix the actual wrong? The company comes second." The room held that statement. Caleb, sitting behind her in the gallery, looked at the back of her head and thought, there she is. The real version. The one she is when the performance falls away, and all that's left is who she actually decided to be. After the session ended, and the room was releasing into the particular organized chaos of people gathering materials and making calls and debriefing in corridor clusters, Caleb found David Lester sitting alone in one of the chairs along the wall, still holding his unread statement. "Mr. Lester," he said. David looked up. "You did good," Caleb said. David Lester looked at him for a moment. "You know what my wife said when I told her I was coming," he said. "What?" "She said, 'David, it's 40 years too late.' And I said, 'Better than never.' And she said," he smiled small and real, "she said, 'You sound like the man I married.'" He looked down at the statement in his hands. "She passed in 2021. But she would have liked being in that room." Caleb sat down beside him. "My wife, too," he said. "She would have liked the whole thing." They sat for a moment, the two of them, on either side of a 37-year gap in a room in Washington that had just done something real. "You know what I'm going to do when I get home," David Lester said. "What?" "Tell my grandchildren to read the clause," he said. "Every clause, all of them, even the ones that look like they don't matter." "Especially those," Caleb said. David nodded. They shook hands. Caleb stood. Across the room. Victoria caught his eye. She was still with two of the committee staffers, but she tilted her head slightly toward the door in a gesture that meant, "When you're ready." He was ready. They walked out into the corridor together, and neither of them said anything for a moment, and then Victoria said, "You set your statement aside." "Yes," he said. "What you said instead," she said. "It was better." "Maya used to say that about most things," he said. "That the prepared version is never as good as the real one." "She was right," Victoria said. "She usually was," he said. They walked toward the exit. "What happens now?" he said. "The amendment goes to committee markup in 6 weeks," she said. "Sandra thinks it passes." Bipartisan support IP protection is one of those issues where the politics align in unexpected ways. Riley is optimistic. "And Vantage. Vantage settled yesterday," she said. "While we were in the air. Full name restoration financial settlement for all 4 of you, and they dropped the NDA clause." She paused. "Gerald called me to confirm." He sounded like a man who had been very uncomfortable for a very long time and was relieved it was ending. Caleb stopped walking. "Yesterday," he said. "You knew yesterday, and you didn't tell me." She looked at him. "You needed to walk into that room without knowing," she said. "If you'd known it was already settled, you might have held something back. You needed to be completely present for David Lester and Priya and Robert." She paused. "I was right about that." He looked at her. She met his gaze without apology and without softness, because that was who she was, and he had stopped needing her to be anything different about 2 months ago. "You were right," he said. "I know," she said. He almost laughed. They walked out. The settlement, when the figures were made public 2 weeks later, was described by the financial press as significant. Sandra used the word exceptional. The documents listed Caleb's compensation at a number that when he first read it, he had to sit down and then stand up and then call Sandra to confirm it was not a typographical error. It was not a typographical error. He called Sophie from the parking lot outside Sandra's office. "Sophie," he said when she answered. "How's the knee?" "Better," she said. "I'm doing the physical therapy exercises. They're boring, but Dr. Reeves said boring means it's working." "She's right," he said. "Sophie, do you remember when I said we were going to be okay?" "You say that a lot," she said. "I know," he said. "This time I can prove it." A pause. "Daddy," she said. "Are we rich?" He thought about what to say. "We're stable," he said. "Solidly, completely, permanently stable. And we're going to use it right." "Can I still go to my school?" she said. "I don't want to switch schools." He almost laughed again. His daughter. "Yes," he said. "You can stay at your school." "Good," she said. "Can we still eat cereal for dinner sometimes?" "Absolutely," he said. "Okay," she said. "Then we're good." He sat in the parking lot for a moment after she hung up. "I thought about the apartment in East Austin and the 2-bedroom layout that was enough, and the peanut butter sandwiches, and the broken humidifier in the closet, and the 4 boxes he'd carried across 2 states, and the November 2017 email, and the gray uniform hanging in his locker, and the coupling, and the oscillation, and the piece of paper in Maya's jacket pocket, and all of it, the whole long, strange journey of it. And he thought that the distance between where he'd been and where he was now was not something you could measure in months or miles or dollar amounts. It was measured in this moment Sophie had said, "We're good." That was the distance. That was everything. 3 months after the hearing. Asterion Robotics launched the Medisync Pro, the updated medical assistant robot with the 2nd-generation coupling system that Caleb's innovation department had finished developing in December. The launch was covered by every major technology publication and 3 national news outlets. The New York Times ran a piece under the headline, "The Robot That Changed How Hospitals Operate, and the Man Who Built Its Heart." The photograph was of Caleb in the innovation lab, not in a gray uniform, standing next to the prototype, with Tessa and Marcus beside him. His name was in the caption. The Medisync Pro was deployed in 47 hospitals by the end of the first quarter. The precision improvement allowed surgeons to perform 5 procedures that had previously been classified as too high risk. In a hospital in Cincinnati, a 12-year-old girl, underwent a spinal surgery that had been declined by 3 other institutions on the grounds that the existing robotic systems couldn't operate with sufficient accuracy in the space required. The surgery took 4 hours and went perfectly. The surgeon sent a note to Asterion Robotics afterward. The note made its way to Caleb's desk. He read it twice. He put it in his desk drawer. He sat for a moment. Then he went back to work on the 3rd generation. Harrison came to his office in February. He knocked on the open door and stood in the doorway with the particular posture of someone who has been thinking about something for a long time and has finally decided to say it. "Brooks," he said. "Harrison," Caleb said. "The 2nd-gen coupling analysis," Harrison said. "Tessa sent me the preliminary numbers for the 3rd generation. The torque distribution model. There's an inefficiency in the 3rd phase that I think I can solve. If you want an outside set of eyes." Caleb looked at him. "You want to collaborate," he said. Harrison's jaw moved slightly. "I'm offering a consultation." "Same thing," Caleb said. "Yes. I want the outside eyes." Harrison nodded. He turned to leave. "Harrison," Caleb said. He stopped. "You're a good engineer," Caleb said. "I meant that when I said it to Victoria, and I mean it now." Harrison stood in the doorway for a moment. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Keep me on." "I know," Caleb said. Harrison looked at him. "Why did you?" he said. "Because being wrong about where to look doesn't make you wrong about everything," Caleb said. "And because this department needs people who argue with me respectfully. Tessa's got it, but she can't carry the whole load." Harris almost smiled. Almost. "I'll have notes on the torque model by Thursday," he said. "I'll be here," Caleb said. Harrison left. Caleb looked at the simulation on his screen. He was here. I was here in this office with his name on the door and his work on the screen and his daughter's 2nd shelf trophy space, waiting for spring, and 3 people in his department who were building something that was going to matter, and a woman on the floor above him who had said, "Don't disappear," and meant it in every direction. He was here. That evening, after everyone else had gone home, Victoria appeared in his office doorway. Sometimes she worked late, and he worked late, and the building got quiet, and the distance between the 6th floor and the 7th was shorter than it looked on the directory board by the elevator. She had her blazer over her arm, and she looked in the particular way she looked at the end of long days like herself. Not the CEO version, not the investor meeting version. Just the version that handed him tools at 4 in the morning and made coffee and kept a sticky note by accident. "How's the 3rd generation?" she said. "Harrison's helping with the torque model," he said. She raised her eyebrows. "You asked Harrison?" "He offered," Caleb said. "I said yes." She looked at him. "You are genuinely the most unexpected person I have ever met," she said. "You told me not to disappear," he said. "I'm working on the opposite." She leaned against the doorframe. "Sophie's physical therapy review is Friday," he said. "Dr. Reeves says she's ahead of schedule." "I know," Victoria said. "I called the clinic." He looked at her. "You called the clinic," he said. "I wanted to know she was okay," she said. "Not apologetically, just directly. I care about her. I don't know the protocol for that given the whatever this is, but I care about her and I checked." He looked at Victoria Sterling, leaning against his office doorframe, having called his daughter's physical therapist because she cared about a little girl she'd never actually met, and he thought about what it meant to let someone into the part of your life that matters most, the part you'd been protecting with both hands since you put Maya in the ground. He thought about doors and how you open them carefully, and how careful didn't mean not at all. "Do you want to come to the review?" he said. She was very still. "Friday," she said. 3:30, he said. "Sophie has been asking to meet you. I've been out of excuses." "You could tell her I'm complicated," she said. "She already knows that," he said. "She thinks it's interesting." A pause. "She's 8 years old," Victoria said. "She thinks complications are interesting." "She's Maya's daughter," he said. "She always will." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "I'd like to come on Friday." "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. She pushed off the doorframe. She walked back toward the elevator. She stopped halfway down the hall and turned around. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah." "For what it's worth," she said. "I think whatever this is, I think it's going somewhere." He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "I think so too." She turned and kept walking. He turned back to his screen. He looked at the simulation model. The third-generation coupling system, 2 months from completion, built on the principle he'd first written to his wife in an email 9 years ago. The solution isn't to make them stronger. It's to make them listen to each other. He saved the file. He put on Maya's jacket. He picked up his bag. He turned off the light. He walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby, and stood there while the building settled around him in its nighttime quiet. Not the invisible quiet of a maintenance shift. Not the particular absence of someone who was not supposed to be seen, but the ordinary quiet of a man at the end of a workday, in a place where his name was on the door and his work was on the walls, and both of them were finally completely exactly where they belonged. The elevator opened. He got in. I went home to his daughter. And Caleb Brooks, the man. They ignored the man who fixed the machine. The man who disappeared and refused in the end to stay disappeared did not look back. He didn't need to. He already knew what was behind him. He was walking toward what came next. And for the first time in 4 years, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.